This is the Unit 1, Chapter 2, Lecture 3. Boy, that just rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? The Glorious Revolution and the English Bill of Rights that we'll look at. Really not looked at in your book. Occasionally, something comes along in the College Board AP world that asks you to look at things like this, or at least know where we came from so you can explain where we went to. So, the Glorious Revolution takes place 1688-1689, and it refers to the accession of William and Mary to the throne in what was largely a bloodless revolution. Now, prior to 1688, the previous king, Charles II, died, leaving the throne to his brother, James II. So you have Charles II, and you have James II. The problem for Englishmen and Englishwomen is that the Stuarts, Charles is a Stuart and James is a Stuart, are Catholics, and England is largely Protestant. And James continued to needle the majority Protestants by appointing several Catholics to high office, and then fathering a son who would have continued the line. And that's not what most English wanted to see as far as their king and queen. So Protestant opponents of the king issued an invitation to William of Orange and his wife, Mary, who just happened to be the daughter of James II. Boy, it gets juicy, huh? It sounds like a soap opera beginning to happen. And William answers the call and brings an army with him from the largely Protestant Netherlands. And James's forces see the writing on the wall, and they desert James II, and they join the forces of William, leaving James no choice but to flee to France. And Parliament makes an offer to William and Mary and says, if you adhere to a Bill of Rights, then you can have the throne. And this is what William and Mary do to become the king and queen of England. Now, the Glorious Revolution was another step in the shift of power from the monarchy to Parliament. Now, from the English Bill of Rights, we get these 9 things, and they're all important, and they should look very, very familiar to you. The concept of limited government. The government can only do the things that the documents that it labors under allow it to do. Our government labors under the limitations and the power granted to it by the Constitution. The First Amendment has the right to petition your government. Our Constitution says Congress has to meet. When and where? Well, the English were asking for regular sessions of Parliament. A consent to taxation. We consent to tax ourselves. Freedom of speech, which is in the First Amendment. No excessive bail, which is Fifth Amendment. Keep and bear arms, which is Second Amendment. No cruel or unusual punishment, which is the Eighth Amendment. And trial by jury, which again, Fifth Amendment. And those are all things that we borrowed from the English Bill of Rights. Now remember, the English Bill of Rights is not one document, but it's a series of moves and pieces of legislation that have evolved over the decades. But you can see there is a link. There's a definite link between their history and ours. And that's probably why we venerate the Constitution, and we can see the links to it back to the Magna Carta. We can see where the English, because it's been more piecemeal, don't value the Magna Carta as much, but certainly have come in a lot of ways to the same point we had, and in enjoying the same freedoms and treasuring the same freedoms that we have. So, the last thing we're going to look at in this rather short lecture is how do states evolve? And when we look at this, we can see that there's kind of a naturalness to how the theories go. And it starts with the evolution of the state, and in a sense, in this part, ends with the social contract. So the evolution of the origin of the state is not a surprise. We can generally theorize that people came together as a family unit and that family unit became more complex as it grew. And at some point, it grew so large that it began to meet and join up and probably have conflict with other groups, which then led to the rise of the force theory, which says that there's always going to be a stronger group than most of the others, and that stronger group then enforces its power on those that are less powerful. And that kind of morphs right into the divine right, where the god or gods have chosen me. And, we see this certainly where the Egyptians weren't never sure where the pharaoh, the human, ended and the pharaoh, the god, began. We see it with Greeks and certainly with other civilizations in the Western world. Augustus was a man; he was the emperor, but he was also a god. Right up into the 16th, 17th century with King Louis XIV, the sun god. But what morphed in the 1600s and the 17th century was a completely new way of looking at how societies and states exist, and that was the social contract theory, where the belief was that a leader would come to power and certainly could be forced from that power when the people no longer agreed with that ruler. Now, each of the four theories defines the government in terms of power. Those who govern have some degree of power over the governed. If their decisions are accepted by the people who give them the right to rule, they have the power or the authority to exercise that power, and people recognize the right of the government to exist. Power generally, even through the social contract, is held by only a few. And that leads to our last thing, because what we have to say is people who have legitimate power over others are called elites. And elites exercise power, and they do it in a number of ways. Now, Marx in the 19th century developed what's known now as Marxist theory. Their add-ons are Leninism and Stalinism and Maoism and Castroism and who knows, probably other things. But Marx said that those who own the means of production, controlling the economic system, will control the government. He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't always quite right either. But honestly, historically, and from a political philosophical look at it, there's quite a bit of things that are right in his theory as to how the world works. With the power elite theory, you have just a few top leaders drawn from the major sectors of the United States economy, or policy, excuse me. So they can be labor leaders, they certainly can be CEOs, they can be generals in the army, and so on and so forth, and they're the ones that make the decision. Bureaucratic theory is one where appointed civil servants control the government without consulting the public. That sounds like the European Union in a lot of ways. And then there's the pluralist theory, which theoretically many of us have believed for the longest time that this is how we work. There's competition among all the affected interests that shapes public policy decision making, and everybody compromises, and we're able to implement a government policy that has broad support. But what has developed in the last 30 or 40 years is what we call hyper-pluralist theory. There is competition among the affected interests, but they have an unwillingness to compromise. And that unwillingness to compromise, it's either their way or the highway, creates gridlock. And it makes it difficult for the government to carry out any sort of policy.
Higher than I thought it was. 656.